Commander Vix of the Krylonian Special Operations Division stared at the holographic display with all four of his eyes, mandibles clicking in frustration. This can't be right. You were supposed to capture Earth's apex predator. Instead, you bring me this. The being standing in the containment chamber looked entirely unremarkable. A slender human female in khaki field clothes, still clutching a worn notebook. She appeared to be sketching something in it, completely ignoring the armed guards surrounding her. "Sir," Lieutenant Zarm's antenna twitched nervously. "We followed the tracking algorithm precisely. It led us to this human who was in the midst of studying what appeared to be one of their most dangerous creatures. Surely that indicates. It indicates that you're an incompetent fool." Vix's carapace flushed a dangerous shade of purple. "We needed a weapon to turn against the resistance, not a... What even is she?" According to her identification materials, she's Dr. Nadia Patel, a zoologist specializing in predator-prey relationships. Zarm consulted his data pad. She was conducting field research on something called a Panthera tigris when we acquired her. In the chamber, Dr. Patel had finished her sketch and was now attempting to communicate with one of the guard drones, gesturing at its crystalline power core with obvious scientific interest. The drone, programmed only for combat, simply continued its patrol pattern. "We have to take her back," Vix decided. "This mission is too crucial, though." "Sir." A junior officer burst into the command center. "We've detected resistance vessels entering the system. We can't risk another Earth expedition now. They're watching that sector too closely." Vix's mandibles clacked in agitation. The resistance was growing stronger every day, their hit-and-run tactics wreaking havoc on Imperial supply lines. This operation was supposed to provide them with a game-changing weapon, something to finally crush the rebels. Instead, they had this. "Fine," he chittered. "Take her to Holding Cell Block Gamma. We'll figure out what to do with her later." But Dr. Puttle had other ideas. As soon as the guards approached, she began asking questions, rapid-fire inquiries about their biological composition, their social structure, their relationship with the ship's ecosystem. The guards, never having encountered a prisoner who showed such genuine interest in them, found themselves answering despite their training. By the time they reached the holding cells, Dr. Puttle had already compiled several pages of notes and sketches. She had also noticed something that would prove crucial. The guards' exoskeletons showed signs of calcium deficiency, likely due to the artificial environment of the spacecraft. In her cell, rather than sleeping or showing signs of stress, she continued her observations. The ventilation system's biological filters were struggling with an aggressive fungal growth. The ship's waste recycling relied on a simplified version of Earth's nitrogen cycle, but it was clearly operating at reduced efficiency. "Fascinating," she murmured, adding another note to her rapidly filling notebook. "Their entire civilization seems to be fighting against natural systems rather than working with them. No wonder they're having problems." When her first meal arrived, she spent more time analyzing its nutritional composition than eating it. The guard, intrigued by her unusual behavior, lingered longer than necessary. "Your protein synthesis is remarkably inefficient," she told him, gesturing at the food. "On Earth, we have these organisms called beetles that can convert plant matter to protein at nearly twice this rate. Have you ever considered—" "Silence, prisoner." The guard snapped, but he found himself making a mental note about the beetles. His clutch mate worked in nutrient production, after all. Over the next few days, as the ship moved deeper into Krylonian space, Dr. Petal's influence began to spread in subtle ways. The guards passed on her casual observations about improving air filtration to maintenance. A chance comment about symbiotic relationships made its way to the ship's medical bay, where a doctor was struggling with a persistent bacterial infection among the crew. Commander Vix, occupied with avoiding resistance patrols, remained unaware that his useless prisoner was already beginning to transform his ship. He didn't notice when the air became cleaner or when crew efficiency increased due to improved nutrition. He certainly didn't realize that Dr. Pitel was systematically documenting every weakness in the Krylonian Empire's artificial ecological systems. By the time they reached the imperial capital, Dr. Pitel had filled 3 notebooks with observations and theories. She had also gained a surprising number of allies among the crew, who found her endless curiosity and genuine desire to help oddly compelling. As she was led from the ship, still scribbling notes about the capital's atmospheric processors, Commander Vix finally began to worry. Something about her calm demeanor and the way his crew watched her departure made his antennae twitch with unease. He had wanted a weapon to use against the resistance. Instead, he had brought something far more dangerous, knowledge wrapped in the form of an unassuming scientist who saw his entire civilization as an ecosystem waiting to be understood and improved. The revolution was about to begin, not with a roar, but with a hypothesis. The Imperial Science Ministry was not what Dr. Patel had expected. Instead of sterile laboratories, she found herself in a vast bioengineered structure, its walls pulsing with artificial veins that carried nutrients and information throughout the capital complex. But even her trained eye could spot the signs of systemic failure: patches of necrotic tissue, irregular rhythms in the fluid flows, subtle signs that this biological technology was fighting against itself. "The prisoner will assist with Project Terraform," announced Senior Minister Rixis, her iridescent scales shimmering with authority. "Our knowledge of Earth's biological systems may prove useful." Terraform. Dr. Patel's eyes lit up with professional interest. "You're attempting to modify planetary environments." "The Empire requires new agricultural worlds," Rixis explained, mandibles twitching with irritation at the human's enthusiasm. "Our current methods are insufficient." Dr. Patel studied the holographic displays showing failed colony attempts. "I see the problem. You're approaching this as conquest rather than integration. Look at this soil bacteria analysis. You're eliminating the native microbiome completely. Those primitive organisms interfere with our engineered crops." Another scientist chittered dismissively. "They are not primitive. They're essential." Dr. Petal pulled out her notebook, sketching rapidly. "On Earth, we learned this lesson centuries ago. The Dust Bowl disasters taught us that trying to completely control an ecosystem always leads to collapse. Instead, look at this." Despite themselves, the Krylonian scientists found themselves drawn into her explanation of soil food webs and symbiotic relationships. Her enthusiasm was infectious, her examples clear and compelling. By the end of the day, several junior researchers were secretly running experiments based on her suggestions. In her private quarters, a cell renamed Guest Accommodation, Dr. Petal reviewed her situation. The Empire clearly intended to use her knowledge as a weapon, a way to expand their territory. But she had other ideas. Every suggestion she made about improving their systems subtly pushed them toward more sustainable, interconnected approaches. Like introducing a keystone species into an ecosystem, she was carefully seeding ideas that would naturally spread. "Your morning nutrient supplement, Doctor," announced the guard, placing a tray in her room. She recognized him from the ship. Karn, the one who'd been so interested in her beetle comment. "Thank you, Carb. How's your clutch mate's protein synthesis project going?" His antennae perked up. "Remarkably well. The modify process has increased efficiency by 23%. But he glanced around furtively. Some of us have been wondering about other possible improvements. Dr. Petal smiled. The network was growing. Over the next few weeks, her influence spread through the ministry like a beneficial virus. She introduced concepts of integrated pest management that eliminated the need for harsh chemical controls. She showed them how to work with native species rather than against them. Each suggestion was carefully calculated to demonstrate the power of cooperation over control. The results were impossible to ignore. Crop yields increased. Environmental system failures decreased. Minister Rixes took credit for the improvements, not realizing that each success further undermined the Empire's philosophy of rigid control. But not everyone was blind to the changes. Dr. Petal was working late one night when a shadowy figure slipped into her lab. She recognized the distinctive markings of the resistance from her time on the military ship. "Doctor," the figure whispered, "we've been watching your work. You're changing things in ways our weapons never could. We need your help." Before she could respond, alarms blared. The figure vanished, leaving behind a small data crystal. When Dr. Patel examined it later, she found it contained information about failing ecosystems on resistance worlds, a request for help wrapped in data. She added the crystal's contents to her growing mathematical model of the Empire's biological systems. The patterns were becoming clear. The entire civilization was like an artificial monoculture, vulnerable to collapse. But she could see another possibility, a way to transform their society as profoundly as a forest replacing a desert. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "Hypothesis: the introduction of Earth-based principles of ecological interdependence into Krylonian systems will trigger a cascading series of changes. As with natural succession, once the process begins, it will be impossible to stop without destroying the entire system." She didn't write her deeper observation that the Empire's greatest vulnerability was its inability to recognize that strength comes from diversity and interconnection, not uniformity and control. Minister Rixes, reviewing Dr. Patel's latest project proposals, remained focused on their immediate benefits. She didn't notice how each suggested improvement subtly increased connections between previously isolated systems, or how each success made it harder to maintain the Empire's rigid hierarchies. But Dr. Patel, watching beneficial bacteria transform the dead soil of a test pot into rich, living earth, knew the truth. Real change, like evolution, was slow but unstoppable. She wasn't just improving their technology. She was planting the seeds of a revolution that would grow naturally from within. And like any good scientist, she was prepared to be patient while her experiment unfolded. The first signs of real change appeared in the outer colonies. Reports began filtering back to the capital of unusual modifications to environmental systems. Unauthorized, but undeniably successful. Dr. Petal recognized her own ideas, transformed and adapted by others, spreading like beneficial mutations through the Empire's worlds. In her new laboratory, expanded to accommodate her growing influence, she reviewed the latest data with carefully concealed satisfaction. Next to her, Professor Nexus, once her harshest critic, gestured excitedly at a holographic display. "The agricultural yields on Krylos VII have doubled without any increase in resource input," he chittered. "It's as if the entire system has spontaneously optimized itself." Natural systems tend to find efficiency when we allow them to. Dr. Patel replied mildly, not mentioning the carefully encrypted communications she'd been having with colonial scientists. Perhaps we should examine the changes they'd made. The truth was, she'd have been orchestrating a subtle rebellion through science for months. Each colonial success story brought more converts to her philosophy of working with natural systems rather than attempting to dominate them. The empire's rigid control was being undermined not by weapons, but by improved crop yields and healthier environments. Minister Rixes burst into the laboratory, her scales flickering with agitation. The emperor demands answers. 3 more colonies have abandoned our standard protocols in favor of these adaptive systems. She waved a report angrily. They claim they can't return to the old methods without causing ecosystem collapse. Fascinating, Dr. Petal murmured, hiding her satisfaction. Perhaps we should study their results. But before Rixes could respond, an alert flashed across the lab's biological displays. The capital's environmental systems were showing unexpected changes. Dr. Patel recognized the pattern immediately. Her ideas had come full circle, transmitted back to the heart of the empire by countless tiny adjustments and improvements. Impossible. Rixes stared at the readings. The systems are reconfiguring themselves. Not exactly, Dr. Patel explained, unable to completely hide her excitement. They're achieving a new equilibrium state. Look at these efficiency metrics. Everything is improving. The only difference is that we're no longer fighting against natural processes. The changes were accelerating. Throughout the capital, rigid artificial systems were being replaced by more flexible, resilient alternatives. Gardens appeared in unexpected places. Waste processing became a source of resources rather than a problem to be controlled. Energy usage dropped as systems began working together instead of in isolation. The resistance, watching through their network of spies, were as surprised as the empire. They had expected Dr. Petal to be a source of tactical information. Instead, she had given them something far more powerful, a way to transform the very foundations of Krylonian society. Late that night, Dr. Petal received another clandestine visitor, but this time it was Karm, her former guard, now a senior administrator in the protein synthesis division. "Doctor," he chittered nervously, "there are rumors. Some say you're destroying the empire. Others call you a savior. The truth is," he paused, antennae waving in agitation, "none of us can deny that things are better. But change is happening so fast." "Change always seems fast when we finally notice it," she replied, showing him her notebooks. "But look, every step has been natural, building on what came before. Like evolution, each small improvement leads to new possibilities." She didn't tell him about her larger plan, how she had carefully calculated each suggestion to create a cascade of improvements that would make returning to the old ways impossible. The empire's strength had been its uniformity, but that was also its weakness. Once new ideas began spreading, they couldn't be contained. More reports arrived daily. Worlds that had been struggling under imperial control were transforming themselves. The rigid hierarchies that had defined Krylonian society for millennia were dissolving in the face of demonstrably better alternatives. Minister Rixes made one final attempt to regain control. "We must stop this. The empire cannot survive such chaos." "It's not chaos," Dr. Petal corrected gently. "It's emergence, the natural development of complex, self-organizing systems. Like a forest after a fire, something new is growing, something stronger." As if to emphasize her point, the biological walls of the laboratory pulsed with new vitality, their patterns more intricate and beautiful than ever before. The empire wasn't being destroyed, it was evolving. In her private notes that night, Dr. Petal wrote, "The network effect has reached critical mass. Like introducing wolves to Yellowstone, the changes have cascaded through every level of their society. The empire thought they wanted a weapon, But what they really needed was a catalyst for change. She smiled as she added one final observation, hypothesis confirmed. Understanding ecosystems is the most powerful knowledge of all. The Imperial Palace, once a monument to rigid control, had transformed. Its bioengineered walls now pulsed with complex patterns that mirrored natural systems. Gardens sprouted in unexpected places, their diverse species working together in ways that defied traditional Krylonian design. Even the Emperor's private chambers had been affected. The air was cleaner, the energy systems more efficient, the entire environment more alive. Emperor Zixtal was not pleased. "You tell me, Minister Rixus," the Emperor's voice vibrated with barely controlled rage, "that we cannot reverse these changes without causing catastrophic system failure. That this human has somehow made us dependent on chaos." Dr. Petal, standing calmly before the imperial throne, corrected him. "Not chaos, Your Majesty, organization. Like a coral reef or a rainforest, complex systems are actually more stable than simple ones. Your empire is becoming more resilient, not less." The Emperor's color shifted to deep purple. "Our civilization was built on order, on control, and now you claim that surrendering control makes us stronger. Let me show you something." Dr. Petal pulled out her ever-present notebook. She projected a holographic model of the Empire's new systems. "See these patterns? They're the same ones we see in successful ecosystems on Earth. When systems are interconnected, they support each other. Remove the rigid controls, and natural efficiency emerges." Before the Emperor could respond, urgent reports began flooding in. The Resistance, taking advantage of the Empire's distraction, had launched a major offensive, but their attacks were having unexpected effects. "Fascinating," Dr. Petal murmured, studying the data. "The new systems are adapting to the disruption, like an immune response." She was right. Worlds that had adopted her changes were proving remarkably resilient to attack. Their decentralized, interconnected systems could root around damage, find new solutions, adapt in real time. Traditional imperial worlds, still relying on rigid control structures, were far more vulnerable. Commander Vix, who had originally brought Dr. Petal to the Empire, burst into the throne room. "Your Majesty, the outer colonies, they're declaring independence. But they're also offering alliance agreements. They're talking about something called symbiotic relationships and mutual benefit." Dr. Petal couldn't help but smile. Her ideas had spread faster than even she had anticipated. The Empire's attempts to contain them had only accelerated their adoption, like trying to stop the spread of seeds by creating wind. "This is your doing." Emperor Zixtal rose from his throne, pointing accusingly at Dr. Petal. "You've destroyed everything we built." "No," she replied quietly. "I showed your people a better way to build. Look at the evidence." She gestured at the streams of data flowing through the palace's walls. "Crop yields are at historic highs. Energy efficiency has doubled. Even your military vessels are performing better with the new adaptive systems." "It's true, Your Majesty," Commander Vix admitted reluctantly. "The ships using her modifications are faster, more efficient, and more resilient to damage. We can't compete without them." The Emperor sank back onto his throne, his color fading to a troubled gray. "Then what becomes of the Empire?" "It evolves," Dr. Petal said simply. "Like all successful systems, it adapts to survive. The real question is, will you evolve with it?" As if in response to her words, the palace's systems surged with new activity. The biological computers had made another leap in efficiency, integrating patterns learned from both Imperial and Resistance worlds. The revolution she had started couldn't be stopped because it wasn't being imposed. It was growing naturally from the ground up. In her private quarters that night, Dr. Patel received an unexpected visitor, a representative from the resistance leadership. "We came to you hoping for weapons," the rebel admitted. "Instead, you've given us peace through science. The Empire is transforming into something new, something neither side expected." "Nature abhors monocultures," Dr. Patel explained. "Diversity and interconnection are always stronger than uniformity and isolation. I just helped your people rediscover that truth." She turned to her window, watching the capital city's new biological systems creating beautiful, ever-changing patterns against the night sky. The Empire wasn't being destroyed. It was becoming something entirely new, something that might finally bring balance to this corner of the galaxy. In her notebook, she wrote, "Final observation. The most powerful force in the universe isn't weapons or control. It's the natural tendency of life to find better ways of working together. The Empire wanted Earth's most dangerous predator, but what they really needed was an understanding of Earth's most successful survival strategy, cooperation. The day of the convergence, as it would later be known, began with an unprecedented event. For the first time in Krylonian history, representatives from the Empire, the Resistance, and the newly independent worlds gathered in the transformed Imperial Palace. The once rigid throne room had evolved into a living amphitheater, its walls adapting to enhance communication and promote cooperation. Dr. Patel stood quietly in the background, observing like she had done countless times in Earth's wildest places. The scene before her was its own kind of ecosystem, finding a new balance. Emperor Zixtel, his colors shifting between uncertainty and determination, addressed the gathered delegation. For 10,000 years, the Empire maintained order through control. But order, as we have learned, is not the same as stability. The Emperor's admission sent ripples through the assembled crowd. Dr. Patel noticed Karb, her former guard now turned ecological systems administrator, nodding thoughtfully. His own transformation mirrored that of the Empire itself. The human scientist we once thought to use as a weapon, the Emperor continued, gesturing toward Dr. Patel, has instead shown us a fundamental truth. The strongest systems are those that embrace diversity and adaptation. Minister Rixes, who had fought the changes for so long, stepped forward with new data. Our studies are conclusive. Worlds that have adopted the new adaptive systems show 300% increases in efficiency. More importantly, they're resistant to disruption in ways our old systems never were. The evidence was undeniable. The rigid imperial systems that had once seemed so powerful now appeared primitive compared to the complex, interconnected networks that had evolved, like comparing a mechanical clock to a living cell. But the most surprising speaker was the resistance leader, General Ixel, whose scales had once been scarred by imperial weapons. "We fought against control," she declared, "but Dr. Patel has shown us that opposition isn't the answer. The real revolution is in understanding how systems can work together." Dr. Patel finally stepped forward, her notebooks, now numbering in the dozens, containing the detailed chronicle of this unprecedented transformation. "What you're experiencing isn't just political change," she explained. "It's ecological succession on a galactic scale. Like a forest recovering after a fire, your civilization is finding a new, more resilient form." She projected a hologram showing the flow of resources, information, and energy across Krylonian space. The pattern was beautiful, reminiscent of Earth's most successful ecosystems. Look at how information flows like nutrients in a food web. See how local adaptations spread like beneficial mutations. You're not losing an empire, You're gaining something far more powerful, a living network. The gathering itself proved her point. Former enemies found themselves sharing solutions to common problems. Independent worlds offered unique adaptations that strengthened the whole. The rigid hierarchies of the past were being replaced by something more flexible, more alive. Emperor Zixtal made the final, historic announcement. The Krylonian Empire will become the Krylonian Network. Our strength will lie not in control, but in connection. Not in uniformity, but in diversity. As the delegates celebrated, Dr. Petal made her final notes. They brought me here thinking Earth's greatest weapon was its predators. But Earth's true power has always been in its networks of life, endless adaptation, cooperation, and renewal. The Empire didn't fall, it blossomed. Later, standing in one of the palace's new gardens, Dr. Petal smiled as she watched various species of plants working together, just as the different factions of Krylonian society were learning to do. Commander Vix, who had started all this by bringing her here, approached. "Not quite the weapon you were looking for?" she asked with gentle humor. "No," he admitted, his colors showing thoughtful patterns. "Something far more powerful. You've taught us that true strength comes not from dominating nature, but from understanding it." As the multiple suns set on this new era, Dr. Petal added one last entry to her notebooks. Final hypothesis. Perhaps this is humanity's real gift to the galaxy. Not our strength or our technology, but our hard-won understanding that life works best when it works together. The wrong creature. No, I was exactly what they needed. Not a weapon of destruction, but a catalyst for growth. The stars seemed brighter that night, as if reflecting the new possibilities awakening across Krylonian space. The revolution was complete, and like all natural processes, it had occurred exactly as it needed to. Not through force, but through the irresistible power of life finding better ways to flourish. End.